I've been trying to decide between the Switch 2 and the Steam Deck OLED as my primary gaming handheld. And it's actually been way harder to pick between the two than I initially thought, and that's because they each have their own strengths and weaknesses, plus their use cases are also very different. So if you're like me and you're trying to decide between the two most popular gaming handhelds right now, here's everything you need to know, from the price to the comfort to the controls, all the way down to the games and more. But first, let's talk about the price. The Steam Deck is technically less expensive, at £349 here in the UK, as opposed to £395 for the Switch 2. However, that is for the LCD model. The OLED model that I've got right here costs £479, and this is really the one that I do recommend you guys get, as it's got a longer battery life than the original LCD Steam Deck, faster Wi-Fi, a higher refresh rate, in addition to a more efficient chip, and most importantly, an absolutely stunning OLED display. So with this in mind, you're looking at a $100 or £84 difference between the Steam Deck OLED and the Switch 2. Not a big price difference, but still one to keep in mind. Now let's talk comfort, by far one of the most important aspects of a handheld. And here, I found the Steam Deck to absolutely blow the Switch 2 out of the water. And that's because the Switch 2 is flat. It doesn't have any hand grips by default. For me, this meant that I was getting hand cramps after as little as 20 minutes of gameplay. The Steam Deck, on the other hand, has some amazing hand grips built right in, so I was able to play it for a few hours straight without any strain whatsoever. Now, the Switch 2 is noticeably thinner and lighter, so carrying it around was more comfortable. However, overall, when using both in handheld mode, I would still pick the Steam Deck any day here. Of course, there is one solution to our Switch 2 comfort problem, and that's with our sponsor, Dbrand. If you're looking to keep your Switch 2 or Steam Deck protected, one of the best ways to do so is with our sponsor Dbrand's Kill Switch case, which adds a ton of grip to your Switch 2, something massively needed due to its flat body, and then also extra grip in the case of the Steam Deck. They can both be configured with a travel cover, which means that the Kill Switch can keep your handhelds fully protected back, front, and sides. The Kill Switch 2 case can also be configured with a card tray for your physical games, while the Steam Deck version features a kickstand. Now, I should mention that these are the Ultra editions of both, which means that aside from the travel cover and the card tray that are included with this version, you also get thumb grips that make the joysticks far more enjoyable to use, since they're taller and with more grip. And you also get these so-called idiot-proof prism screen protectors that are crazy easy to install. So check out Dbrand by using the links below to get the ultimate protection for your devices. Which brings me to their controls, where the Steam Deck is once again superior here. The ABXY buttons do have more travel, and they also feel more like on a traditional controller, whereas on the Switch, they feel much clickier, so to say. The Steam Deck also has some proper analog triggers, whereas the Switch doesn't. So racing through Night City in Cyberpunk was way more enjoyable on the Steam Deck, since I was able to control the speed of the car exactly how I wanted it. Plus, the Steam Deck also has two trackpads, which I found to be incredibly useful in games like Age of Empires 2, which I was honestly not expecting to be able to play on a handheld, as this is a game made for keyboard and mouse controls. And on top of all of this, the Steam Deck also features 4 customizable back buttons that you can map to anything really, through a very straightforward process. Plus, you can even download custom control schemes from Steam that other users have made to really tailor each game to your liking. So yeah, the Steam Deck has impressed me massively in terms of both comfort and controls. However, the Switch does have one major advantage here, which is that you can actually detach the Joy-Cons. And this is awesome for a co-op. Playing Mario Kart with your friends like this is such an amazing experience. It's something that you cannot do at all with a Steam Deck. Plus, you can also use the included grip attachment to turn your Joy-Cons into a more comfortable controller. Or you can keep one in each hand for more comfort, and then play in tabletop mode, thanks to its built-in kickstand. Oh, and I also found the haptics to be much better on the Switch too, as they were more gradual, so to say. Although the Steam Deck's haptics were more powerful. So yes, you do get a lot of playing options on the Switch. Not even to mention that while you don't get those dual trackpads like you do with the Steam Deck, you do get mouse support if you turn your Joy-Cons to the side. In games like Civ 7, for example, I found that you get much more accurate mouse controls than on the Steam Deck using the Joy-Con like this. And this has actually been my go-to way of playing Civ 7. Although in handheld, the Steam Deck does have a better experience. So I guess control-wise, it's somewhat of a tie. If you prefer handheld gaming, then the Steam Deck is a much better choice, but if you want a ton of options, then the Switch is superior thanks to its detachable Joy-Cons and actual mouse controls. The next crucial aspect of any handheld is its display. And this is where the Steam Deck just blows the Switch 2's display out of the water. Compared to the LCD display on the Switch 2, which tops at around 400 nits, the Switch OLED's OLED screen can boost to 600 nits in SDR and up to a whopping 1000 nits in HDR, and by the way, that's also sustained brightness. In Hades, for example, I was just blown away by how bright the Steam Deck was compared to the Switch 2, only to realize that my brightness was actually just at 50%. So once I maxed it out, it was almost blinding me. And that was on top of the perfect black levels and the significantly more vibrant colors. Like honestly, this display is just mind-blowing. The Switch 2 doesn't even come close. It is an absolute joy to play games on a Steam Deck OLED, as really there isn't any other handheld on the market that can match the Steam Deck OLED's quality of display. However, the Switch 2 does actually have 3 advantages here. Number 1, the resolution is higher at 1080p compared to 800p, which I have noticed in games like Cyberpunk, where the in-game menus do look noticeably sharper. However, games that haven't been updated for the Switch 2, like Hades for example, will actually look blurry as they'll be running at 720p. This isn't an issue on the Steam Deck, which acts more of like a PC, so you can just adjust resolution in any game to whatever you want, up to 800p. The second advantage of the Switch 2's display is that 120Hz variable refresh rate as opposed to 90Hz fixed on the Steam Deck. Although every single game aside from the Welcome Tour that I played only ran at 60Hz, so right now there aren't any games that take advantage of that 120Hz screen. And 3, we also get a larger display at 7.9 inches as opposed to 7.4, which I do find to be more enjoyable in games like Civ 7, where we do have a lot of small text-based UI elements, so having these bigger and also sharper does make a massive difference. Although despite these 3 advantages, I would still pick the Steam Deck OLED's display any time of the day. Its brightness, its superb black levels, and crazy vibrant colors makes it an absolute joy to play on, without any quality downsides compared to my OLED TV. I guess it's just a shame that you cannot have a custom wallpaper on either of these, as our wallpapers would have looked amazing, especially on the Steam Deck OLED. A link below, by the way, to download them for your phone and other devices. Which brings me to their speakers, where they're both really good, although I do find the Steam Deck to be louder, while the Switch 2 tends to have more bass. So far, the Steam Deck destroys the Switch every single way, although none of this matters if the gaming experience isn't good enough, so which one does it better? Well, it's pretty obvious that if you do want to play Nintendo games, well, yes, you can emulate some of these on the Steam Deck. The best place to play these on is on the Switch 2. Especially now with the Switch 2 edition games, you do get 1080p resolution at 60 FPS in games like Breath of the Wild, Link's Awakening, Mario Odyssey, and many others. But if you're like me and you also want to play some big AAA titles on the go, that's where things become a bit more complicated. Because unlike the Switch 1, which didn't really have many AAA titles, the Switch 2 does have a few already, like Cyberpunk, Hitman World of Assassination, and a few more to come like Elden Ring and more. And in Cyberpunk, for example, you do get high resolution textures, high resolution assets like this medicine bottle here that looks squared off on the Steam Deck, and you also get a higher game resolution as well, so everything just looks way sharper, especially the in-game menus. However, on the Steam Deck, you can just adjust any in-game settings as much as you want. If you really are bothered by these low-res in-game assets, for example, you can bump these up and bring something else down. On the Switch, you only get 2 modes, quality and performance. Oh, and by the way, the skins that you're seeing on both throughout this video are of course from the brand. I especially love these color match skins on the Switch. Another game that I've tried was Civilization 7, where the Switch 2 version did look better out of the box, so to say, but I was able to tweak the Steam Deck version to make it look even better, although at the expense of my frame rates, which, to be honest, in a turn-based game, I wouldn't really say that it matters quite as much. Same for Hades, which, like I said, because of the lack of a Switch 2 version, the Steam Deck does look better. So despite the Switch 2 having more raw performance, you don't really see that in every single game. And even in the ones that you do, you can still tweak the Steam Deck to get a similar level of quality while dropping some of the other settings. So I do really like the flexibility that you do get out of the Steam Deck here. Not even to mention the vast library of games that the Steam Deck can play. From games like Age of Empires, none of which work on the Switch, to multiplayer titles like Helldivers 2, and even big titles like Microsoft Flight Sim. Sure, these may be coming to the Switch at some point, but we don't really know when that would be. Also, if you've already got a PC, then getting a Steam Deck is a no-brainer, as you'll be able to continue your progress right from where you've left off. Whereas with the Switch, unless the game specifically supports cross-saves like Cyberpunk, Civ 7, and No Man's Sky, you're out of luck. Oh, and by the way, even with cross-saves, you still have to buy the game twice, which is not an issue with the Steam Deck. Plus, the Steam Deck does allow you to stream games from your PS5 via remote play. You can also play Game Pass games via the browser, or even stream your entire Steam library straight from your PC. You just get so many options. That being said, there is one advantage to the Switch 2 when it comes to the gaming experience aside from the Nintendo titles, and that is the ability to dock it and play your games in 4K on your TV. Now, you can technically do this on a Steam Deck as well if you do have a USB-C dock, although it is way more straightforward on the Switch as that dock comes right in the box, and you can also detach the Joy-Cons to your controller, whereas on the Steam Deck you will need to buy a separate controller. However, the Steam Deck is essentially a full-size PC when you dock it, so you can actually work on it if that's what you want, whereas the Switch is a gaming console. So, having said all of this, which one would I actually recommend? Well, I would say if you plan on specifically playing Nintendo titles, or you just want to take this to a friend's house so that you can all play Mario Kart or Mario Party, then the Switch 2 is so good at that. It's a very easy to use family console with some amazing first-party titles and some fairly decent third-party ones too, with way more to come. However, if you want to stream your PC, Xbox, or PS5 games, or you want to play pretty much any AAA titles on the go on a stunning OLED display, then get a Steam Deck. Also, despite a Steam Deck being $100 more than the Switch 2, the games are way cheaper, as sales are constantly ongoing on Steam, whereas Switch 2 games, especially if you buy them digitally, will always be $80. Oh, and from my experience, the battery life is also quite a bit better on the Steam Deck by roughly 1 to 2 hours, which is fairly significant. That's why personally, I would go for the Steam Deck, but this of course depends on your use case as well. So let me know which one would you go for. I'm Daniel, ZONEofTECH, and I'll see you guys in the next one. ZONEofTECH, signing out. Cheers.